Hello, welcome, and thank you for joining us as we bring to you an update on the Guyana EU FLEGT VPA, or the Voluntary Partnership Agreement, a timber trade agreement between Guyana and the European. My name is Laura Singh, and with us we have
Kenny David, head of the EU FLEGT Secretariat.
Great. So we are going to give you an update since our last program. We would have been telling you a few things that would have been happening, and between then and now, we'll share with you some of the activities of the National Technical Working Group, our engagement with stakeholders, as well as our engagement with the European Union. I'll lead Kenny into the discussions on the update.
Thank you very much, Laura. Indeed, a number of things have changed from the last time we were here, and I'm glad that we have this opportunity to be able to update our stakeholders on this very important process that we've been involved in now for just about 6 years. It has been a long process, but one that I think has borne a lot of fruit, and so we're excited even as we move forward. From the last time we were here, we were still working on the annexes, which essentially is what makes up this FLEGT agreement. And so what we had to continue to work on those because there was still work that needed to be done. And so over the last few months, we've managed to advance that process quite nicely, I would say. We've had many discussions, some very long days, talking to the EU, talking to the EFI, to really be able to advance that discussion. Because, negotiations take time. And sometimes you may have one little point that you can be stuck on, sometimes back and forth for many days, until you can agree at a position that the country is happy with. And while I may have my own personal likes and dislikes, I think stakeholders have to recognize that you have to come to an agreement that benefits all stakeholders and benefit the country as a whole. And so what we've managed to do over the last few months is bring the annexes to the place where we are quite happy with them. They're almost in their final stages. In fact, our last submission to the EU was a few days ago, and we are anticipating a discussion with them. In fact, tomorrow actually, yeah. Yes. And at that discussion, we're hoping to now to say yes, if there are any I's that we didn't dot or any T's that we didn't cross, in that sense, that we could do that and be done with it. But the process is now, and so what that would mean is that the process is now at the stage where we're looking to initial the agreement in that sense. And this initialing really is a signal to both parties and to all stakeholders, both in the EU side and the Guyana side, that we are happy with the document. We're happy with the content in that sense. There will still be some work to be done in terms of what we call a legal scrubbing, where the legal minds are going to go through it to ensure that it's legally sound. But essentially, it signals to both parties that we are happy with it. But once that, and we're very excited because once we get to that initialing, which we expect to happen within the next, I would say, 2 to 3 months, once we get to that process, we can then move towards what we call the pre-implementation. And there are a number of exciting things that will happen in that pre-implementation. But for our stakeholders to note that we have taken your concerns, we have taken the comments, the feedback you've given, and as far as possible, we have put it into the annexes. We've kept our stakeholders in the loop. We've kept them, at least let there always be consistent flow of information back and forth to ensure that what they said was captured, and if it could not be captured, why we had to, leave it out in that sense. But we are at the stage where we're very happy with the annexes as a country, and we're hoping that we can really move the process to the next phase.
And I know that our stakeholders themselves, not only have we made them aware of what's happening, but they've made us aware in terms of how they feel about the document, since we would have shared that document
Absolutely.
with them.
Absolutely.
And they would have gone through them in terms of the technical aspects, in terms of the requirements that they need to meet in order to meet compliance. I know you did mention the acronym EFI, and just in case persons are wondering, the EFI, that's the European Forest Institute, right. And it's a technical body that is giving support to this process, bringing their experiences from other countries such as Liberia, Honduras, even Ghana, and many other countries who are engaged in this process at different phases. So they bring their experience to the table, to the documents, so that Guyana, we don't want to really make mistakes at this point in time or even from the beginning. So I would say the 6 years would have been a really smooth, well, not really smooth. We've had our encounters.
Yes.
But, that technical knowledge that they brought to the table was certainly useful.
And maybe just add, I think it was, because again, FLEGT, it was new to us. But EFI, I think, obviously had a lot more experience. And they had worked in similar countries. And I think that helped. And I think their willingness to share that information with us so that we can then understand. And of course, I think what was useful as well is that EFI, being a technical team, they needed to learn. And they were very interested in learning about Guyana's systems and to understand just how good a system it is, and then to say to us that, listen, rather than trying to reinvent the wheel, and I'd like to say this to stakeholders, build on a system. And so I think the ones they understood, then they were then even able to make even more meaningful contributions because they now understood what we were already building on. So I think, yes, working with EFI, as I said, though challenging at times, technology, sometimes the internet, because a lot of these discussions happened,
even
by
agreeing to disagree.
Well, exactly. But yes, I think it was a very fruitful experience, and we've certainly learned a lot from them to bring this agreement to where it currently is.
And having come to this phase of the agreement, the initialing aspect of it, and even after we would have initialed, there are some activities that we will be undertaking in the implementation phase, and these are activities that will not be new to us, so to speak, because they were brought out in terms of our field testing that we would have done in June last year, along with the stakeholders, NGOs, civil society, government, all stakeholders, key stakeholders involved. We would have tested the system and identified areas that needed enhancement, that needed improvements, etc. So these activities are all laid out in thematic areas in our, what we call Annex 8 of the agreement. And we will be undertaking with stakeholders efforts to fix them.
Absolutely. And that's what I'm saying for us, which is why I use the word exciting, because I think, and maybe for stakeholders to understand, while we have not gotten, because ideally implementation should come after you've ratified the document. But I think one of the good things about what we were able to sort of work out with the EU is to say that because we have already signaled at this initialing that both parties are in a sense happy with what is already contained in the document, that we can sort of start working on some of these activities that you outlined earlier, which we would have identified earlier, that need to be addressed. Some of the areas that need to be fixed in that sense.
I know communication is a big one.
Absolutely. I think and again recognizing that one of the things that the VPA will sort of needs to happen under the process is the flow of information. Not only from stakeholders to us at the level of the Forestry Commission, but also between all of these other agencies, 15 other agencies that will be a part of sharing some kind of information with the Commission. So communication has to be done and done quite effectively in a very, very time-effective manner if this process is going to work and work well.
Yes. Also, we know that the Guyana Timber Legality Assurance System is one of the main documents or annexes, so to speak, that and the legality definition. These two annexes outline the requirements that stakeholders are already meeting, and of course with the enhancements even improve that tremendously. So with respect to strengthening this not the annex itself, but the structures within the annex, the implementing structures within the annex, I know that there will be a lot of activity behind that. A lot of support will be required with respect to funds. Agencies, the GTLAS agencies, as we call them, 16 of those agencies will be very busy looking at their the institutional, or rather the way they share information, just to make it simple, share information in terms of expediting the time it takes to make information available,
Absolutely.
speaking to each other, even at the level of, I know the legality definition speaks towards origin.
Yes.
I know Lands and Survey play a huge role in that, and they've already taken steps along with the EPA in terms of acquiring funding, I think, from FAO,
Yes.
to just to begin the strengthening process. So, I mean, it doesn't only start at the initialing, but we've had the foresight to basically get into it there and
Yeah,
then.
and if I may add, I think it's important for stakeholders to recognize that um, it takes a lot. It takes a lot of resources. And again, this is probably, and I say probably, one of the first processes that will require so many agencies to work together, in a sense, with a common goal. So they still have their individual mandates in that sense, but all of it, the information coming from those agencies is now going to have to come in a common place, to say yes, one is compliant, because the legality definition, legality. And stakeholders, again, we've discussed this with stakeholders, over and over. Legality is more than just origin. So while Lands and Surveys and even the commission who issues concessions, while those agencies are responsible for saying, yes, someone has rights to a piece of land, there are also other agencies that says, because now legality has a social aspect, legality has an environmental aspect, and so the Environmental Protection Agency and the Ministry of Social Protection. So all these agencies are now required to play a role in saying yes, somebody is compliant with what is in the legality definition. It takes a lot of resources. It'll take a lot of time, but I think if we were to use the fact that I think what we've noticed over the last 5-6 years is that we've really had a lot of agencies maybe a little slow at first, but certainly that collaboration sort of picked up over time, and I think it's at a really good place. Agencies are excited, and I think maybe they're excited also because FLEGT is not seeking to do something new, because these agencies are already doing so much of the work. But I think it is really to allow for it to happen in a better manner, to do it better, and we want to work with you. We want to look at where the gaps may exist. What are the things that hinders any one of these 60 agencies from carrying out their function in a particular manner, and how do we work with you to make that work and work better?
And this is demonstrated quite clearly in the GFC. I know that they carry out monitoring activities, auditing activities in the field. The specialized departments are involved in that. And I'd like to clue in, particularly in compliance with respect to tag
Sure,
use.
sure.
I know that the assigned unit would have actually gone out there and tried to make, or rather made, an assessment of compliance in particular area, and we're going to just clue in on the tag aspect of it.
Sure.
What is a tag?
Well, I'm sure most of our stakeholders know what a
Yes,
tag is.
but the
For
audience.
the few who might not know, it's really just a tag, as the name suggests. It's a piece of plastic that has a unique number and barcode that is placed on a particular tree, a log that has been, tree that has been felled. So half of it is placed on the log, half is placed on the stump, and then that number, that unique number, stays on that piece of timber all the way through to the sawmills. And again, it allows you to be able to go further down the chain, and you can check all the way back to say, yes, this log came from a particular tree. Of course, when you get to the sawmill, because you're cutting that log into a number of smaller pieces, then it becomes difficult. But what the system that the Forestry Commission has in place is allowed to happen is, because we can effectively trace everything all the way up to the sawmill, then we're pretty confident of what is in a sawmill has been verified legal. We have traced it all the way there. And so it really allows us to trace all the way back. And so that tag, but again, as you mentioned, compliance and some of the issues we've seen with that, the Forest Monitoring Division, while there has been improvement, I think some of the more common issues you may have is, with tag uses, is ensuring, because it's a tracking system, that unique number has to be placed on whatever documentation is going to be used, and it has to be replicated a number of times accurately. And so sometimes what you find happening is, you may find a number shows up on a removal permit, as we call it, that may have already been used. or you may find that a number shows up that was used in another area. These are some of the more
Yeah.
common, problems we have seen with how tags are used. And of course, because the system is so heavily dependent on tags being used correctly, you can only begin to imagine what happens if a number isn't properly replicated, or a number that was used before. The thing is that the system is designed; it will pick it up. But I think though, and again, talking to Mr. Igar a little bit, earlier was also, it is clear that there has been some changes and positive changes,
Yes.
because we've noticed quite a bit of reduction in the incidences of these things happening, and so, and for us, it's a sign that we're moving in the sort of right direction. It still
Yeah.
requires, and I think, and maybe just to know, I think persons are beginning to understand why it is so important for you to do it, and the fact that what you do at any stage of that chain affects the next person. So it's not just about the guy who's cutting it. He needs to do it right, so that the next guy who is moving that timber from the concession, let's say, he's going to a river, and then that guy is moving it from there to a sawmill. Everybody has to ensure that they play their part and play it effectively, because it'll affect the next guy down the chain. And because the VPA process, and as you mentioned, the TLAS, is all about tracking and tracing effectively, if done incorrectly at any one of those stages. So we're excited because, again, having some discussion with Mr. Garrett, it is that changes are happening, and it's positive. We're seeing almost, I would say, maybe about a 50% reduction, almost a 50% reduction in some of these
notable.
common. Exactly. So, again, and we want to, under the VPA, we'll continue to work with stakeholders to ensure that we bring that to zero in that sense.
Yeah, I think it's significant that the commission would undertake to make assessments, and based on those assessments and then identifying the defects and the common defects, so to speak,
Sure.
people get a chance to know where the mistakes are being made, and to really, based on recommendations and also from efforts from the commission itself, to train persons to, avoid making these mistakes. It certainly has been an improvement, a significant one, between the divisions, Demerara, Berbice, Essequibo, over 2017-2018
Absolutely,
period.
absolutely, and it's a good point you mentioned. I think the fact that the commission has, seeking to understand, where in a sense, where the major problems, like what are the major areas that we need to fix in that sense. In fact, now that you mentioned that, even for the other agencies that are going to be involved in the process, a similar exercise is being done, to understand. So when you talk about complying with any of the other 16 agencies, whether it's GRA, NIS, EPA, Ministry of Labor, whomever you're talking to, where are the gaps? And I think, first of all, making an assessment of that is critical to this process. So for us moving forward, while you mentioned the field testing, I think to get a little deeper into where those gaps exist, and then again we'll then be able to clearly say what is necessary to fix those gaps.
Yes, specifically, just moving on, just a bit more on compliance with
Sure.
respect to the lumber yards. I think the GFC also did some assessment, some investigation into that as well, to determine, in terms of percentage, what levels of compliance are there in various areas, such as the fiscal obligation of the lumberyard dealers, the wood tracking system itself, and they would have customized this to match with the legality definition, to really get a real feel of the level of compliance happening
right.
at specifically lumberyards. And I know they're going to replicate this with the sawmills,
Absolutely.
with the furniture manufacturers, to really understand how much work needs to be done at the various processing facilities.
Yeah,
so to speak.
absolutely. And I don't know if our viewers can see what I'm seeing, but this graph, I think, is quite encouraging, and encouraging because even without us necessarily making the kind of intervention that needs to happen on the implementation, you can already see that the percentages of compliance are already fairly high. And in fact, when we talk about the licensing requirements, as you can see, there's a 90% compliance. When we talk about fiscal obligations, the payments that need to be made, there is over 70% compliance wood tracking system. So all the tagging and the permits and all of that, there's over 90%. And again, and that's why I'm saying, we say to stakeholders that while the VPA itself is new, the business of tracking and tracing timber throughout the supply chain is not. And in fact, it is one of those things. And again, even when we see with lumberyards, and you said the commission is going to replicate this with many of the with sawmills and many of the other operators, to understand just how compliant they already are. And I think what we're going to find is there is a pretty high level of compliance, but certainly in maybe just being a bit biased in terms of the Forestry Commission. Certainly, I think we're going to find that there is a high level of compliance. But that is not to say that whatever is found, in any of the other areas, we're going to work with those. So we're quite encouraged with the numbers. What actually happens at the lumberyard, for example, is that look at the very last column there in terms of the operation. What happens in terms of the information coming in? Are they capturing it correctly when they process at these lumberyards, or when they sell? What is being sold? The documentation that has to be kept. That submission that has to happen at the end of every month. Those things, and I think over an 80% compliance is quite encouraging.
Yes,
so
agreed.
while, and for us, in fact, is why we think that sometimes implementation it will take some time, and I think with the right resources. But with these numbers, I don't think it will be as long as many others expect it to be. In fact, it could be quite short if we keep looking at numbers like these. I would have I think very far to go in that sense.
I think our stakeholders must be commended for the keeping their compliance.
Absolutely.
It's because of them.
Absolutely.
Making these changes and trying to meet the requirements that are set out to them by the regulatory body, the Guyana Forestry Commission. I think you guys are really to be commended out there, and we are often commended by our international partners coming in, persons visiting. Only recently we had one person who indicated that our systems are one of the best.
Absolutely, and that is
in
why
the world.
Exactly, and that's why I think as you said that they, our stakeholders should be commended, and not, I don't want to say not to worry, but understand that we are so far along in terms of compliance. Yes, there are some areas that need to be worked on, and I'm not gonna, we're not gonna pretend that they don't exist or the system is perfect. It is not, but to understand that just as we have worked even at the level of the commission to ensure that we are seeing the numbers we are seeing in terms of complying, we have worked with you, and there are many stakeholders who can testify of that we've worked with you, and I think in the same vein we want to continue to work with you. So we may understand their compliance issues with other agencies, for example, but we're saying, listen, as we go into implementation, we are not going to say you have to comply and then that's it. We're saying we want to work with the agency, but also work with you. How can we help you to be compliant? And so whether those compliance, whether it is fiscal, whether it is social, whether it is environmental, we're working with the agencies that are responsible for that, but we want to work with you as well, because again, the thing about the FLEGT process, and I think stakeholders, and this is why each stakeholder is so very important to this process, is that it has to work for the smallest man in this process as well as it works for the largest. So while we may think, the larger guys are going to find it easy to comply, it does not work if the smaller guy is not able to comply as well.
That's true.
And that's, I think, what is quite nice.
That's a frequently asked question. Will the way we do forestry change? Will this agreement allow small loggers to continue to operate? It's always a question on the table at any engagement that we may have, whether it's consultations or meetings or workshops. Persons are always concerned in terms of their role as a small logger. How will they benefit? What are the changes that they'll need to make? Can they really meet the same requirement as a large concessionaire, or are there differences in terms of the requirements?
I think, again, depending on where you are, again, whether you're a large sawmill or a small sawmill, the requirements are the same. And given that it may be that it is easier for large concessions, but I think, as I said, the small sawmills and the small lumberyards are just as important. There's timber that is flowing through these operations that ultimately is part of the supply chain, ultimately can be exported. And so while while the process is unfolding, and yes, there is room for compliance. Everybody has to comply. And again, maybe just for persons to understand that in our design, the technical working group was designed in such a way, and again, we were constantly talking to all stakeholders. So we didn't set the bar so high that the smaller guys can't reach it in that sense. But you wanted to get to a level that sort of satisfy both parties that are in the agreement, but also keeping a close watch on where your stakeholders are. So I believe that I think we've done a very good job of that. We have developed all of this with the stakeholder in mind. So it's not just the market, because clearly it is the market. In fact, one of the things we've done is we've actually said to the EU that as part of this implementation process, we want to work with stakeholders to improve what they're doing, provide some level of training and capacity building for them, so that what they're doing is also improved. So again, the smaller operators can rest assured, we want you to be able to access that market just like everybody else. And to allow that to happen, a standard has to be reached, but we want to work with you so that we are all at least at that minimum standard to say, yes, we can be part of this process of exporting timber to the EU.
Yes, and obviously it's a trade agreement, a timber trade agreement, and we'll be trading well, we currently do trade under the EUTR, the timber regulation. So even though we don't have a license, persons can still export to the EU under that timber regulation. It's an international standard in terms of quality. We need to meet that grade. And we do have the timber grading rule to guide that. So and it's available and applicable to everyone. I do believe that just some final thoughts on the VPA. Once we ratify, initial ratify, sign, move into our implementation, move into FLEGT licensed exports, can we make any modification to this agreement?
Absolutely. I think, and again, it's a good question, because persons want to know, well, while it doesn't have all the products, for example, furniture is not currently part of the agreement.
Right.
What if we're desirous of adding furniture? And again, it's one of the good things about the agreement. We can revisit it. We'll have to agree on what period of time before we go back to it. But yes, it can be revisited, and we can add more products to that list. Of course, we'll have to ensure that in country we can trace those products, from source all the way to market effectively.
You have joined us on an update on the Guyana EU FLEGT Voluntary Partnership Agreement. Thank you for joining us. We do hope that you, have learned and have gathered much from what was just said. You can always visit us on our website, www.flectgy.org. You can also visit us at our office, and that is at 17 Access Road, Kingston, Georgetown, or email us at euflectguyana@gmail.com, euflectguyana@gmail.com. Thank you for joining us. Have a great day.